The blood-red horizon kissed the western sky as Jane Jameson clutched her small carpet bag, the only remnant of her former life in Boston. The train had deposited her at the dusty platform of Hollow Creek, Wyoming Territory, in 1875, and now she stood alone, squinting at the setting sun, wondering if the man who had answered her advertisement would come at all. The wind picked up, sending dust swirling around her skirts as Jane pulled her shawl tighter across her shoulders. 6 weeks of correspondence with Mr. Norman Garrett had led to this moment, her arrival in this frontier town as his mail-order bride. Yet the platform had emptied, the station master had locked up, and darkness was quickly approaching. "Perhaps he's changed his mind," she whispered to herself, fighting back tears. At 22, Jane had made the bold decision to leave behind a life of drudgery as a seamstress after her parents' passing left her with mounting debts and few prospects. The advertisement in the matrimonial news had seemed like Providence, a cattle rancher seeking a woman of good character and practical disposition to share his life in Wyoming. Jane lowered herself onto her trunk, careful not to soil her best traveling dress. The minutes stretched into an hour as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty street. A coyote howled in the distance, sending a shiver down her spine. "Miss Jameson?" The deep voice startled her. Jane looked up to find a tall figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. He stepped closer, and she could make out his features, a strong jawline partially covered by a neatly trimmed beard, eyes the color of a summer sky, and shoulders broad enough to suggest years of hard physical labor. "Mr. Garrett?" she asked, rising to her feet, smoothing her skirts with trembling hands. "No, madam. The name's Nathan Grayson." He removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair with sun-bleached streaks. "I own the Double G Ranch northeast of town. I'm afraid I have some news about Norman Garrett." Jane's heart sank. "Has something happened to him?" Nathan's expression grew solemn. "Yes, madam. There was an accident 3 days ago. His horse spooked during a thunderstorm, threw him into Rattlesnake Creek. By the time his ranch hands found him." He trailed off, the implication clear. Jane felt the blood drain from her face. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "He's dead?" "Yes, madam, I'm sorry. Norman was a good man. A neighbor of mine." Nathan shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the task of delivering such news. "He'd told everyone about you coming. The whole town knew how much he was looking forward to your arrival." Jane sank back onto her trunk, her mind reeling. "I see," was all she could manage. Everything, her plans, her future, her very survival had depended on this marriage. Now she found herself alone in a strange town, with limited funds and no connections. "The stagecoach back east doesn't come through till Thursday," Nathan said, watching her carefully. "Do you have somewhere to stay until then?" I don't know anyone here," Jane admitted. "Perhaps there's a boarding house." Nathan nodded. "Mrs. Wilson runs a respectable place, but—" He hesitated. "Miss Jameson, I don't mean to pry, but do you have the means to pay for lodging and a ticket back east?" Jane's silence was answer enough. The cowboy's expression softened. "Look, I made a promise to Norman before he passed. He asked me to make sure you were taken care of if anything happened to him." He gestured to a wagon parked down the street. "My sister Sarah lives at the ranch with me. You're welcome to stay with us until you decide what you want to do." Jane studied the man before her, trying to gauge his character. In Boston, she would never consider accepting such an offer from a stranger. But this wasn't Boston, and she had precious few options. "That's very kind, Mr. Grayson, but I couldn't impose. You'll never wait alone again," he said quietly, his voice carrying on the evening breeze. "That's what Norman told me to tell you if anything happened to him. Said he'd promised you that in his letters." Tears welled in Jane's eyes. It was true Norman had written those exact words in his third letter, when she'd confessed her fear of traveling so far to marry a man she'd never met. His reassurance had given her the courage to board the train. "I appreciate the offer," she said finally. "Just until I can find suitable employment and accommodations in town." Nathan nodded, retrieving her trunk with ease. "Let's get you settled then. It's a fair ride to the ranch, and these parts get mighty dark without a moon." The wagon creaked as they made their way through the town's single main street. Jane observed the typical frontier establishments: a general store, a saloon, a small church, and what appeared to be a doctor's office. Hollow Creek was smaller than she'd imagined from Norman's descriptions. "Have you been in Wyoming long, Mr. Grayson?" she asked, attempting to fill the uncomfortable silence. 10 years now. Came out after the war with my brother James. He passed on 5 years back, lung fever. Sarah came out to keep house after that." He glanced at her. "It's rough country, but honest. A person can build something here." "And your ranch? It's successful?" Nathan's mouth curved slightly. "We're doing all right. 2,000 acres, 400 head of cattle. Nothing like the big spreads in Texas, but it's growing every year." Jane nodded, trying to absorb this information while fighting exhaustion from her long journey. The wagon had left the town behind, following a rutted trail that wound through sagebrush and rolling hills. "Mr. Garrett Norman wrote that his ranch was just outside of town," she said, confusion evident in her voice. Nathan's expression darkened slightly. "Norman had a small spread, 100 acres, couple dozen cattle. He was more of a horseman, had a way with them that most don't. But he wasn't exactly forthcoming about the size of his operation. Wanted to impress you, I reckon." Jane fell silent, wondering what other surprises might have awaited her had Norman lived. The thought made her uncomfortably aware of her precarious situation, a stranger in a strange land, dependent on the kindness of another stranger. "There it is," Nathan said after they'd traveled for nearly an hour. "Double G Ranch." In the fading light, Jane could make out a substantial 2-story house built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, and a large barn stood a short distance away. Lamplight glowed from the windows, a welcoming beacon in the gathering darkness. As they approached, the front door swung open, and a young woman stepped onto the porch. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with the same brown hair as Nathan, though hers was pulled back in a practical braid. "Nathan? We were getting worried. Supper's been ready for—" She stopped short when she noticed Jane. "Oh, you must be Miss Jameson. We weren't expecting you tonight." Nathan helped Jane down from the wagon. "Sarah, this is Miss Jane Jameson. There's been a change of plans. Miss Jameson will be staying with us for a while." Sarah's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly, extending her hand. "Of course. Welcome to our home, Miss Jameson. I'm Sarah Grayson." "Please, call me Jane," she replied, taking the offered hand. "I appreciate your hospitality on such short notice." "Well, come inside. You must be exhausted after your journey." Sarah ushered her toward the house. "I'll show you to your room, and then we can have some supper. Nothing fancy, just beef stew and biscuits." The interior of the house surprised Jane. While rustic, it was clean and well-appointed, with polished wood floors, a stone fireplace, and comfortable-looking furniture. Colorful quilts hung on the walls, adding warmth to the space. "It's lovely," Jane said sincerely. "We've tried to make it homey," Sarah replied. "It was just a bachelor's shack when Nathan and James first built it. I've been adding touches here and there for the past 5 years." Sarah led Jane upstairs to a small but pleasant bedroom. A patchwork quilt covered the bed, and simple curtains framed the window. "I hope this will be comfortable for you. The washstand has fresh water, and there's a chamber pot under the bed. We have a proper bathhouse out back, but we'll have to heat water if you'd like a bath tonight." "This is more than adequate," Jane assured her. "Thank you." Once Sarah left, Jane sank onto the bed, finally allowing herself to process the day's events. The future she'd planned had evaporated in an instant. Norman Garrett, the man she'd agreed to marry, whose letters had given her hope for a new beginning, was gone, and now she found herself in the home of a man she'd just met, with no clear path forward. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered, reaching for her reticule to retrieve her parents' small Bible. As she ran her fingers over the worn leather cover, a soft knock came at the door. "Jane, supper's ready whenever you are," Sarah called. "Thank you, I'll be right down," Jane replied, tucking the Bible back into her bag. She quickly freshened up, smoothed her hair, and made her way downstairs. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of beef stew. Nathan stood as she entered, pulling out a chair for her at the large wooden table. The simple courtesy touched her. "I've told Sarah what happened," he said as they seated themselves. "We're both sorry about Norman." "Thank you," Jane said quietly. "Though I should be honest, I didn't know him well. We exchanged letters for 6 weeks, but—" She trailed off, uncertain how to explain the arrangement without seeming cold-hearted. "Mail-order marriages are common out here," Sarah said, serving the stew. "No shame in it. Women are scarce in these parts, and a man gets lonely." Nathan cleared his throat. "What Sarah means to say is, we understand, and you're welcome to stay as long as you need while you figure things out." "I appreciate that, but I wouldn't want to be a burden. Perhaps there's work in town? I'm a skilled seamstress, and I've done bookkeeping as well." The siblings exchanged a glance. "Hollow Creek's a small place," Nathan said carefully. "Mrs. Peterson handles most of the sewing work, and the general store is run by the Peterson family too. As for bookkeeping, most folks here barely keep books at all." "I see," Jane murmured, her heart sinking further. "But," Sarah added quickly, "we could use some help around here. I've been trying to manage the house, the garden, and the chickens by myself, and it's a lot for one person. The men need feeding, clothes need mending, and I've been wanting to expand the kitchen garden but haven't had the time." "What Sarah's trying to say," Nathan interjected with a small smile, "is that we'd be happy to offer you employment here at the ranch, if you're willing. Room, board, and a fair wage." Jane considered the offer. It would give her time to consider her options, save some money, and perhaps eventually make her way back east or to another western town with more opportunities. "That's very generous," she said. "I accept, at least temporarily." Nathan nodded, seeming pleased. "Good. Now eat up before it gets cold." As they ate, Sarah asked questions about Boston and Jane's journey west. The conversation was pleasant, if somewhat stilted at first, but gradually grew more comfortable. Jane found herself relaxing slightly for the first time since stepping off the train. After the meal, exhaustion caught up with her. Nathan excused himself to check on the livestock, while Sarah showed Jane back to her room. "There are night clothes in the dresser," Sarah said. "They might be a bit big, they're mine, but they'll do until your trunk is brought up." "Thank you for everything," Jane said sincerely. "This has all been overwhelming." Sarah squeezed her hand. "Get some rest. Things often look brighter in the morning." Left alone, Jane changed into the borrowed nightgown and slipped between the clean sheets. Despite her fatigue, sleep eluded her as her mind raced with questions about her future. The sound of a harmonica drifted through her window, a melancholy tune that somehow matched her mood. She gazed out at the star-filled sky, so much brighter and vaster than in Boston, and wondered what tomorrow would bring in this strange new land. When Jane awoke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the window. For a moment, she was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up, noticing her trunk had been brought to the room sometime while she slept. After dressing in a simple blue work dress from her limited wardrobe, Jane made her way downstairs. The house was quiet, but she could smell coffee brewing. She followed the aroma to the kitchen, where she found Sarah kneading bread dough. "Good morning," Sarah greeted her with a warm smile. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than expected," Jane admitted. "What time is it?" "Nearly 7. You must have been exhausted." Sarah gestured to the stove. "Coffee's hot if you'd like some. Breakfast will be ready soon, just frying up some bacon and eggs." "May I help?" Jane asked, pouring herself a cup of the strong coffee. "You can set the table if you'd like. Nathan and the hands have already eaten and gone out to work. They start at dawn." Jane found the plates and utensils where Sarah directed and set the table for 2. "How many ranch hands work here?" she asked. 3 full-time: Miguel, Hank, and Tom. During roundup and branding, Nathan hires extra help. They take their meals in the bunkhouse most days except for Sunday supper. Sarah slid the bread pans into the oven. "We'll need to discuss your duties after breakfast. I'm thinking you can help with the cooking, mending, and gardening to start." Over a hearty breakfast, Sarah outlined the daily routine at the ranch. Jane listened attentively, mentally cataloging the tasks she'd be expected to perform. Many were familiar from her upbringing, though she'd lived in a city for the past several years. "I should warn you," Sarah said as they cleared the dishes. "Nathan can be reserved. He's not unfriendly, just private. The war changed him, like it did many men." Jane nodded. "I understand. He's been very kind, considering the circumstances." Sarah smiled. "He's a good man. The best brother a girl could ask for. He brought me out here after our parents died, gave me a home when I had nowhere to go." She handed Jane a dishcloth. "Now, let me show you around the place." The tour revealed a well-organized, prosperous operation. Beyond the main house were a bunkhouse, barn, smokehouse, chicken coop, and several corrals. A large vegetable garden stretched behind the house, and a small orchard of young apple trees stood nearby. "Nathan's pride and joy," Sarah explained, gesturing to the orchard. "Everyone said apple trees wouldn't grow here, but he was determined. They're just starting to bear fruit." Throughout the morning, Jane helped Sarah with various chores, gathering eggs, weeding the garden, and preparing a midday meal for the ranch hands. The work was physical, but satisfying, and Jane found herself appreciating the straightforward nature of the tasks. When the men rode in for the noon meal, Jane was introduced to the ranch hands Miguel Vasquez, a skilled horseman from Texas; Hank Miller, a grizzled older man who'd been with the ranch since its beginning; and Tom Cooper, a young cowboy barely out of his teens. Nathan arrived last, dusty from the morning's work. He nodded to Jane, his expression unreadable. "Miss Jameson, settling in all right?" "Yes, thank you," she replied. "Your sister has been most helpful." "Good." He washed his hands in the basin by the door, then joined the men at the table. The meal was a quiet affair, the men too hungry for much conversation. Jane observed Nathan with the others, noting how they deferred to him without subservience. It was clear they respected him. After the men returned to work, Sarah and Jane spent the afternoon mending shirts and trousers. Sarah was easy to talk to, and Jane found herself sharing stories of her life in Boston, her parents' small tailoring shop, their deaths from influenza 2 years apart, her struggle to keep the business going before finally selling it to pay off debts. "It must have taken courage to come west," Sarah remarked, threading a needle. Jane sighed. "Desperation, more like. But yes, I was terrified. Still am, if I'm being honest." "We all were at first. This country has a way of testing you." Sarah looked up from her sewing. "But it rewards courage, too." Over the next week, Jane fell into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose early, helped prepare meals, tended the garden, and assisted with whatever needed doing. The physical labor left her tired but satisfied each evening. She discovered she had a knack for cooking that she'd never fully explored in Boston. And the men appreciated her efforts to vary their usual fare. Nathan remained something of an enigma. He was unfailingly polite, but maintained a certain distance. Jane often caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression thoughtful. On Sunday, Jane accompanied Sarah and Nathan to the small church in Hollow Creek. The congregation welcomed her warmly, though she noticed curious glances and whispers. News of Norman Garrett's death and her arrival had clearly spread. After the service, several women approached her, offering condolences and introducing themselves. Among them was Mrs. Wilson, who ran the boarding house. "Such a shame about Mr. Garrett," the older woman said. "But you're fortunate to have found a place with the Graysons. Nathan's one of the most respected men in the county." As they prepared to leave, the pastor's wife, Mrs. Bennett, pulled Jane aside. "We're having a quilting circle on Tuesday afternoon. You'd be most welcome to join us." "Thank you. I'd like that," Jane replied, grateful for the opportunity to meet other women in the community. On the ride back to the ranch, Jane mentioned the invitation. "You should go," Sarah said enthusiastically. "The quilting circle is as much about news and friendship as it is about sewing." Nathan nodded. "I can drive you both into town. I need to discuss cattle prices with Peterson anyway." That evening, as Jane sat on the porch enjoying the cool air after a warm day, Nathan joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her wordlessly and settled into the chair beside her. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. "It's beautiful here," Jane said finally. "Different from anything I've known, but beautiful." "It grows on you," Nathan replied. "First year, I hated it. The emptiness, the silence. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." "Sarah mentioned you fought in the war?" Nathan's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes. Union cavalry. James too." "My father as well," Jane said softly. "He came home different. Quieter. Had nightmares till the day he died." Nathan nodded, understanding in his eyes. Some things can't be unseen. He took a sip of his coffee. "Your father taught you bookkeeping?" Sarah mentioned. "Yes, he believed girls should be educated the same as boys. Mother taught me sewing and cooking. But father insisted I learn mathematics and business." "Smart man." Nathan seemed to be considering something. "Our operation's growing. I've been handling the books, but I'm no accountant. Would you be willing to take a look at them? See if there are improvements to be made?" Jane felt a surge of pleasure at being asked to use her skills. "I'd be happy to." The next morning, Nathan showed her to a small room off the main parlor that served as his office. A roll-top desk dominated the space, covered with papers, receipts, and a leather-bound ledger. "It's a mess," he admitted ruefully. "I try to keep up with it, but—" "May I?" Jane gestured to the ledger. Nathan nodded, pulling out the chair for her. "I'll leave you to it. Just holler if you need anything." For the next several hours, Jane lost herself in figures and calculations. The ranch's financial situation was generally sound, but Nathan's bookkeeping was rudimentary at best. She organized receipts, corrected entries, and created a more efficient system for tracking expenses and income. When Nathan returned mid-afternoon, she had the ledger and several sheets of paper ready. "You've been busy," he remarked, surveying the newly organized desk. "Your ranch is doing well," Jane said, "but there are opportunities for improvement." She explained her findings, how certain expenses could be reduced, which cattle sales had been most profitable, and why tracking breeding lineages more carefully could increase the value of future herds. Nathan listened intently, asking intelligent questions. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, studying her with new respect. "Miss Jameson, you have a good head for business," he said finally. "Better than mine, clearly." Jane felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "Thank you. I enjoyed the work. It's been some time since I've used these skills." "Would you be willing to take over the books permanently?" I'd increase your wages, of course. I'd be happy to, Jane replied, pleased by his trust in her abilities. As the days passed, Jane's duties at the ranch evolved. She continued to help Sarah with household tasks, but spent several hours each day in the office, organizing the ranch's finances. The work gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since her father's business had failed. Tuesday brought the quilting circle in town. Jane enjoyed meeting the women of Hollow Creek and hearing their stories of frontier life. Many had come west as mail-order brides themselves, which helped Jane feel less alone in her experience. Mrs. Bennett, the pastor's wife, took a particular interest in Jane. "How are you finding life at the Double G?" she asked as they stitched. "Everyone has been very kind," Jane replied carefully. "The Graysons are good people," Mrs. Bennett said, nodding. "Nathan's been alone too long, if you ask me. Not that it's my place to say so." Her meaningful glance made Jane blush. "We have a strictly professional relationship," Jane clarified. "I work for Mr. Grayson." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Bennett said, with a knowing smile that suggested she didn't believe a word of it. On the ride back to the ranch, Jane was quieter than usual, Mrs. Bennett's insinuations weighing on her mind. She had begun to admire Nathan, his quiet strength, his fairness with the ranch hands, his devotion to his sister, but the idea of romantic feelings seemed premature. Her heart was still recovering from the shock of Norman's death and her changed circumstances. As May gave way to June, the ranch grew busier with summer activities. Jane found herself increasingly integrated into ranch operations. Nathan began consulting her on business decisions, valuing her practical approach and financial acumen. One evening, as they sat on the porch after supper, Nathan broached a subject that had apparently been on his mind. "Miss Jameson, Jane, if I may have you given thought to your long-term plans?" Jane hesitated. "I've been focused on the present, to be honest. Learning my duties here, adjusting to Western life." Nathan nodded, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "You've become invaluable to the operation. Sarah and I both appreciate your contributions." He paused. "I hope you'll consider staying on permanently." "Thank you," Jane said, touched by the sentiment. "I've grown fond of the ranch. And of you and Sarah," she added quickly, feeling her cheeks warm. "It's become more of a home than I expected." Something flickered in Nathan's eyes. Pleasure, perhaps. Or relief. "I'm glad to hear it." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Nathan stood, suddenly alert, his hand moving instinctively to his hip, where Jane knew he carried a revolver. A rider emerged from the gathering darkness, calling out a greeting. Nathan relaxed, recognizing the voice. "Evening, Sheriff," he called back. "What brings you out this way?" Sheriff Davis, a stocky man with a salt and pepper mustache, dismounted with a grunt. "Evening, Nathan. Miss Jameson." He tipped his hat to Jane. "Sorry to disturb you, but I've got news you should hear." Nathan invited him inside, where Sarah provided coffee. The sheriff accepted the cup gratefully, warming his hands around it before speaking. "There's been trouble over near Rattlesnake Creek. Cattle going missing, primarily from smaller spreads. 3 ranchers hit so far." Nathan frowned. "Rustlers?" "Looks that way. Organized, too. They're taking 20, 30 head at a time, driving them north toward the Montana border." The sheriff sipped his coffee. "Just wanted to warn you to keep an eye out. You've got more men than most, but your north pasture's vulnerable." "Appreciate the warning," Nathan said. "I'll have the boys keep extra watches." After the sheriff departed, the mood in the house was somber. Cattle rustling was a serious threat to any ranch's survival. "Do you think we'll be targeted?" Jane asked as she and Nathan returned to the porch. "Hard to say. We're larger than the spreads they've hit so far, which means more potential profit, but also more risk." He gazed out into the darkness. "I'll move some of the herd closer to the house tomorrow, Post additional guards. Jane was struck by the calm efficiency with which he addressed the threat. You've faced this before. Comes with the territory. Rustlers, wolves, drought, blizzards, ranching's not for the faint of heart. He glanced at her. Frightened? Concerned, Jane corrected, but not frightened. Not with you in charge. The words slipped out before she could consider them, but the smile they brought to Nathan's face made her glad she'd spoken honestly. The next day brought increased activity as Nathan implemented security measures. The ranch hands moved cattle from the far pastures to fields closer to the main buildings and established a rotation for night watches. Jane noticed Nathan checking his rifle and revolver, cleaning and loading them with practiced hands. The threat of rustlers created an undercurrent of tension over the following days. Nathan spent long hours in the saddle, checking boundary fences and keeping watch over the herd. He returned each evening exhausted but vigilant. A week after the sheriff's warning, Jane was awakened in the middle of the night by the sound of gunshots. She sat bolt upright, heart pounding. More shots followed, then shouting. Pulling on her robe, she rushed to the window. In the moonlight, she could make out figures on horseback near the north corral. The flash of gunfire illuminated the chaotic scene. Without thinking, she grabbed the small revolver Nathan had given her for protection and hurried downstairs. Sarah was already in the kitchen, loading a shotgun with trembling hands. Rustlers, she said grimly. They've come for the prize bulls. Where's Nathan? Jane asked, tying her robe more securely. Out there. He heard them trying to cut the fence. Sarah finished loading the shotgun. Stay here. Bolt the door behind me. You can't go out there, Jane protested. I can shoot as well as any man, Sarah replied with determination, and Nathan needs help. Before Jane could argue further, Sarah slipped out the back door. Jane bolted it as instructed, then moved to the front window, peering out anxiously. The gunfire had intensified. She could see Nathan and two of the ranch hands, Miguel and Hank. She thought, exchanging shots with several mounted men who were attempting to drive a small group of cattle through a gap in the fence. A movement near the barn caught her eye, a man creeping toward the house, rifle in hand. Sarah was nowhere in sight. Jane's heart raced. The man was clearly trying to flank Nathan and the others. Without stopping to think, she unbolted the front door and stepped onto the porch, revolver raised. Stop right there, she called, her voice steadier than she felt. The man whirled, bringing his rifle up. Jane fired, the recoil nearly causing her to drop the revolver. She missed, but the shot was close enough to make the rustler dive for cover. Jane, get back inside. Nathan's voice carried over the din of gunfire and frightened cattle. The distraction nearly cost him dearly. One of the rustlers took aim at Nathan, who was exposed as he turned toward the house. Without hesitation, Jane fired again. This time, her shot found its mark. The rustler cried out, dropping his weapon and clutching his shoulder. The tide of the battle turned quickly after that. Outnumbered and facing unexpected resistance, the rustlers retreated, abandoning their attempt to steal the cattle. Nathan and his men fired a few final shots as the thieves fled into the darkness. In the sudden silence that followed, Jane remained on the porch, the revolver still clutched in her trembling hand. Nathan sprinted toward her, his face a mixture of anger and relief. Are you hurt? He demanded, taking the gun from her nerveless fingers. No, I'm fine, she assured him. Sarah. Here, Sarah called, emerging from the shadows near the barn, shotgun in hand. I'm all right. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, visibly shaken. You both could have been killed. That man was going to shoot you in the back, Jane said, her voice quavering now that the danger had passed. I couldn't just watch. Nathan's expression softened. You saved my life. Anyone would have done the same, she murmured. No, not anyone. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Thank you. The rest of the night passed in a flurry of activity. Tom had been grazed by a bullet but insisted it was nothing serious. Jane cleaned and bandaged the wound while Nathan and the others secured the property and checked on the cattle. Sheriff Davis arrived before dawn with a deputy, took statements, and organized a posse to pursue the rustlers. By mid-morning, exhaustion had set in. Sarah insisted everyone get some rest while she kept watch. Jane was too keyed up to sleep despite her fatigue. She sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold, replaying the night's events in her mind. She didn't hear Nathan enter until he pulled out the chair across from her. He looked as tired as she felt, with dark circles under his eyes and a day's growth of beard shadowing his jaw. "You should be resting," she said. "So should you." He studied her face. "You were very brave last night." Jane shook her head. "I was terrified. I just reacted. That's what courage is, feeling fear but acting anyway." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "Jane, I need to say something." The seriousness in his tone made her heart skip. "Yes?" "When I saw you step onto that porch with a gun in your hand, I was afraid in a way I haven't been since the war. The thought of you being hurt." He trailed off, struggling to find the words. "It made me realize something I've been trying to ignore." Jane held her breath, hardly daring to hope what he might say next. "I've developed feelings for you," he continued, his voice low but steady. "Deep feelings. I know it's too soon, and your situation is complicated. You came here expecting to marry another man, and instead found yourself dependent on a stranger." "Nathan," she began, but he held up his hand. "Please, let me finish. I don't expect anything from you. You're free to stay here as an employee for as long as you wish, with no obligations. But I wanted you to know how I feel, and that if someday you might consider me as more than your employer, I would be the happiest man in Wyoming Territory." Jane felt tears well in her eyes. "When I first arrived and learned of Norman's death, I thought my future had been shattered. I came west because I had no options left in Boston, and the prospect of marriage to a stranger seemed better than destitution." She turned her hand to clasp his. "But these past weeks at the Double G have shown me what a real home feels like, what a real partnership could be." Hope dawned in Nathan's eyes. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that I've developed feelings for you too," Jane admitted. "Strong ones. But you're right, it's soon, and I need time." "Time you shall have," Nathan promised, raising her hand to his lips. "As much as you need." The rustlers were caught 2 days later, trapped by the sheriff's posse in a narrow canyon. Among them was the man Jane had shot, his wound already festering. They were taken to the county jail to await trial, and the stolen cattle were returned to their rightful owners. Life at the Double G gradually returned to normal, though Nathan increased security measures, adding another ranch hand and ensuring someone was always on watch at night. The atmosphere between Jane and Nathan had changed subtly, a new awareness, a gentle tension that wasn't unpleasant. Sarah noticed, of course. "You and my brother seem to have reached an understanding," she remarked one afternoon as they picked beans in the garden. Jane smiled. "We're taking things slowly." "Good. Nathan deserves happiness. So do you." Sarah straightened, stretching her back. "Just don't take too long. He's not as patient as he pretends to be." June melted into July, bringing intense heat and the constant threat of prairie fires. Nathan and the men worked tirelessly, ensuring water sources for the cattle and maintaining fire breaks around the property. Jane continued to manage the books and help Sarah with household duties, but she also began accompanying Nathan on short rides around the ranch, learning more about the operation and the land he loved. During these rides, Nathan opened up to her about his past, his childhood in Pennsylvania, his experiences during the war, his journey west with James, and their struggles to establish the ranch. Jane shared her own stories, her sheltered upbringing, her parents' business, her dreams for the future. One evening in mid-July, Nathan invited Jane to ride with him to his favorite spot on the property. They set out after supper when the worst of the day's heat had passed. Nathan led her to a small rise overlooking a creek, where a single cottonwood tree provided shade. The view was spectacular rolling hills stretching to distant mountains, painted in shades of gold by the setting sun. "I come here to think," Nathan said as they dismounted. "It helps me see the bigger picture." They sat beneath the tree, a comfortable silence between them. Jane felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The vastness of the landscape, so intimidating when she'd first arrived, now seemed full of possibility. "I received a letter from Boston yesterday," she said finally. "From Mrs. Winters, who bought my parents' shop. She offered me my old position back." Nathan went still beside her. "Are you considering it?" "I was, at first. It would be familiar. Safe." Jane turned to face him. "But I realized something as I read her letter. Boston isn't home anymore. This is." The hope that flared in Nathan's eyes made her heart race. "Jane, I love you, Nathan," she said simply. "I think I've been falling in love with you since that first night, when you told me I'd never wait alone again." Nathan reached for her hand. "I meant those words. I knew, even then, that there was something special about you. Your courage, your grace under pressure, your determination." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Jane Jameson, more than I thought possible." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. "I've been carrying this for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment." From the pouch, he produced a ring, a simple gold band set with a small diamond. "It was my mother's." Jane felt tears spring to her eyes. "Nathan." "I'm not asking you to rush," he assured her. "We can have a long engagement if you prefer. But I want you to know that I'm committed to you, to us." Jane extended her left hand. "Ask me properly, Mr. Grayson." Nathan smiled, then slid from the blanket onto one knee. "Jane Jameson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Will you build a life with me here? Share my home, my name, and whatever future God grants us?" "Yes," Jane whispered, tears flowing freely now. "With all my heart." "Yes." Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, but quickly deepened into something more passionate. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "We should head back," Nathan said reluctantly, glancing at the darkening sky. "Sarah will be wondering where we are." Jane nodded, though she was reluctant to end this perfect moment. "She'll be pleased. She's been dropping hints for weeks." Nathan laughed, helping Jane to her feet. "Subtle as a stampeding buffalo, my sister." The ride back to the ranch was filled with plans and dreams, expansions to the house, additional cattle, perhaps an even larger apple orchard. By the time they reached the barn, Jane felt as though her happiness might overflow. Sarah was waiting on the porch, a knowing smile spreading across her face as she spotted the ring on Jane's hand. She embraced them both, her joy evident. "It's about time," she declared. "I was beginning to think you'd never get around to it, Nathan." Nathan rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "Some things can't be rushed, little sister." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Jane and Nathan agreed on a September wedding, giving them time to make arrangements but not so long that they would have to endure an extended engagement. The news spread quickly through Hollow Creek, met with general approval and good wishes. Mrs. Bennet organized the women of the church to help with preparations. Jane was touched by how the community embraced her, no longer viewing her as the mail-order bride who had been left waiting, but as Nathan Grayson's future wife, a position of respect in the county. August brought challenges, a brief drought that threatened the crops, a bout of colic that nearly killed one of Nathan's prize bulls, and news that the railroad would be bypassing Hollow Creek in favor of a route 20 miles east. Jane faced each difficulty alongside Nathan, their partnership growing stronger as they weathered each storm together. Jane wrote to Mrs. Winters in Boston, declining the job offer and explaining her new circumstances. She enclosed a small order for fabric that couldn't be obtained in Hollow Creek white silk and lace for a wedding dress that Sarah insisted on helping her make. As the wedding day approached, Jane found herself reflecting on the strange path that had led her to this place and this man. What had begun as a desperate gamble agreeing to marry a stranger in a distant territory had transformed into something she could never have imagined: true love, a real home, and a future filled with promise. On the morning of September 15th, 1875, Jane awoke in her bedroom at the Double G for the last time as Jane Jameson. The next time she slept under this roof, she would be Jane Grayson, mistress of the ranch and wife to the man she loved with all her heart. Sarah helped her dress in the gown they had labored over for weeks, a creation of white silk with lace trim, simpler than what might have been fashionable in Boston but perfectly suited to a frontier wedding. Her hair was arranged in a simple but elegant style, adorned with small white flowers from the garden. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, blinking back tears. "Nathan won't be able to speak when he sees you." "Thank you," Jane replied, embracing her soon-to-be sister. "For everything. For welcoming me. For your friendship. For helping me find my place here." Sarah squeezed her hands. "No thanks needed. You've made my brother happier than I've ever seen him. That's gift enough." The ceremony was held in the small church in Hollow Creek, filled to capacity with friends and neighbors. Nathan waited at the altar, handsome in a new black suit, his eyes never leaving Jane as she walked down the aisle on Sheriff Davis's arm, the older man having volunteered to give her away. Pastor Bennett conducted the service with warmth and sincerity. When the time came to exchange vows, Nathan's voice was steady, his eyes full of love as he promised to cherish Jane for all his days. Jane's own voice trembled slightly with emotion as she made the same promises in return. "By the power vested in me," Pastor Bennett concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." He smiled at Nathan. "You may kiss your bride." The reception was held at the Double G, the yard transformed with tables, lanterns, and wildflowers. The entire community came to celebrate, bringing food and gifts and good wishes. There was music and dancing, laughter, and a few happy tears. As evening fell, Nathan led Jane away from the festivities to the porch, where they had sat together so many times over the past months. "Happy, Mrs. Grayson?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Jane replied, leaning into his embrace. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their guests enjoy the celebration. The future stretched before them, challenging at times, no doubt, but filled with love and possibility. "Do you ever think about that first evening?" Nathan asked softly. "When you stood alone at the train station and I came to deliver such difficult news?" Jane nodded. "Often. It seemed like the end of all my hopes. Instead, it was just the beginning." Nathan turned her in his arms, his expression serious. "I meant what I said that night, you know. You'll never wait alone again, Jane. Not as long as I live." "I know," she whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "And I'll hold you to that promise, Nathan Grayson, for all the days of our lives." As stars appeared in the Wyoming sky, Jane reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west as a mail-order bride, standing alone at dusk on a dusty platform, her future uncertain. Now she stood in the arms of the man she loved, surrounded by friends who had become family, in a place that had become home. Life on the frontier would never be easy. There would be hardships and challenges, joys and sorrows. But Jane knew that whatever came, she would face it with Nathan by her side. The lonely woman who had waited at the station was gone, replaced by a woman who had found her strength, her purpose, and her heart's desire in this vast, beautiful land. 3 years later, Jane stood on the porch of the Double G, watching as Nathan rode in from the south pasture, their 2-year-old son Daniel waving excitedly from his perch in front of his father on the saddle. The ranch had prospered beyond their expectations. The herd now numbered over 600. The orchard produced apples that had won prizes at the territorial fair, and the house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. Sarah had married Tom Cooper the previous spring and lived in a small house Nathan had built for them on the eastern edge of the property. She was expecting their first child in the winter. Jane rested a hand on her own rounded belly, feeling the gentle movements of the new life within a daughter. She was certain, though Nathan insisted it would be another son. As Nathan dismounted and lifted Daniel down, the little boy ran to his mother, chattering excitedly about the new calves he'd seen. Jane knelt to embrace him, then rose to welcome her husband. "Everything all right?" she asked as Nathan kissed her. "Better than all right," he replied, his hand joining hers on her belly. "The south pasture's greener than I've ever seen it. The new well is flowing strong, and I spotted a bald eagle nesting near the creek." Jane smiled, recognizing the contentment in his voice. Good omens, all of them. They walked into the house together, Daniel running ahead to find the cookies Jane had baked that morning. Nathan paused in the doorway, drawing Jane back for another kiss. "I still can't believe how lucky I am," he murmured against her hair. "That I found you, that you stayed, that you love me back." "Not luck," Jane corrected gently. "Providence." Nathan smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Providence, then. And the greatest blessing of my life." As they crossed the threshold together, Jane thought of the frightened young woman who had stood alone at dusk on a train platform, uncertain of her future. That woman could never have imagined the life awaiting her, a life filled with love, purpose, and the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful in this wild, beautiful land. The promise Nathan had made that first night had been kept in ways neither of them could have foreseen. Jane Grayson would never wait alone again. She had found her place, her family, and her home under the vast Wyoming sky.